Hello, good evening everyone, and welcome on behalf of Aberdeen Performing Arts and the festival partners. Welcome to Granite Noir. I'm Jackie Collins, founder and director of the Newcastle Noir Festival, and I'm delighted you've joined us for this event, part of the digital staging of Aberdeen's International Crime Writing Festival. Welcome to an audience with Joe Nesbo. A fabulous evening in store. Thank you for your patience in waiting for us. I got lost in the wings. If you're familiar with the lemon tree, you know sometimes it's a little labyrinth. But before I introduce Joe formally, please can I say a huge thank you to Leslie Carrera, our BSL interpreter for this evening. And can I encourage you too, audience members, please, to send in your questions for Joe via the text box there by your screen. And we'll be fielding those points in our time together. So, Joe Nesbo, welcome to Granite Noir. Thank you so much for being with us here this evening.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to be able to chat to you about your work. But in case anybody who's watching who is unfamiliar, Joe Nesbo is one of the world's best-selling crime writers, the creator of the Harry Hole series, one of the most intriguing characters in contemporary crime fiction. Joe is an international #1 bestseller whose books are published in 50 languages, probably more as we're speaking, selling over 33 million copies around the world. Before becoming a crime writer, Joe played football for Norway's Premier League team Molde, but that career sadly had to be left behind. He took 3 years military service, attended business school, and formed the band Didera, then There in English. And they topped the charts in Norway while Nesbo worked a day job as a financial analyst. When commissioned to write a memoir about the life on the road with the band, he came up with the plot for his first Harry Hole novel instead, The Bat, which was published in 1997. Fast forward, more than 20 publications later, and here we are with Nesbo's most recent novel, The Kingdom, the story of two brothers coping with a devastating family legacy. It's a simmering, complex thriller, delivering shocks and surprises at every turn. Thank you, Joe, for your writing, for the series and the standalones and the pleasure that you bring worldwide to crime fiction lovers.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to begin by asking, though, I have been told that normally at this point in the year, you tend to spend the winters in sunnier climes. Sadly, the pandemic is not making these things possible. How have you been coping with the Norwegian winter?
Well, it's actually, I think it's been like 20 years since I spent January and February in Norway. So, but I guess so for me, it's almost like a new experience. You know, it's I think that the light here is more or less the same as where you are in Aberdeen. So short days, and we really had a really cold period now. So my balcony here is all covered in ice and snow. So it's but you know it's. I can't complain. You know, it's next year. Hopefully, I can go back to rock climbing in Southeast Asia and do some writing there also, which is now I realize what a paradise that is. So hopefully next year I will appreciate it even more.
I am sure that you will. May I ask, do you have a special place out there? Is there one specific place that you're really looking forward to getting back to?
Well, I've been going rock climbing in Kalymnos in Greece for now for like 10 years, and that is probably the place that I miss the most. It has just fantastic rock and it's a fantastic place to go. And every year there's friends from all over the world coming there to rock climb.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more about rock climbing later, if that's okay. But in my introduction, I mentioned, that amazing list of publications, and I wonder if you could speak to that young whose 97 novel, was an instant success there, novel. Um, would you have any words of advice for him now? If you could speak to him, what would you say to him after all that has gone in this trajectory?
I don't know really. It's my first novel is the only novel that I read of my own novels that I reread actually, and I was I was doing that for a radio program, and I was a bit worried that it would feel dated and that I would see all the mistakes I made at my first go at the crime novel. And sure, there were some things that I would have done differently today, but also there was this freshness. I could tell that this young man he was having it was a great kick for him just to spend time writing and coming up with this story. So I think actually my only advice would be, keep going. It's you will hopefully you will get better. You will learn something, some things along the way. But basically, I was, you know. To some extent, much to my surprise, I was quite happy with the first novel.
I think it's intriguing how it was not your first choice of a career. Often when you talk to crime writers and they say, "Oh, I've always wanted to write," but your leap into that world, came almost serendipity, and I love that. That idea of success comes along in a way that maybe you hadn't expected in your life.
No, I mean, I was I started out. I thought I was going to play football for a living. I guess that's every boy's dream. And at the age of 16, 15, 16, 17, it also seems almost realistic. But I was injured, and probably realistically, it would have been difficult for a Norwegian to have a full-time job as a footballer back in the 70s and early 80s. So I always, felt that that was my dream that didn't come true really. Then I would play in the band, which was another dream that came true, and then. I guess I was always expected to write a novel. I didn't know I was until I phoned my friends when my first novel was going to get published. I phoned my friends and I said that you won't believe this, but I'm going to get published. And their response was more like, of course you are, what took you so long? So they were surprised that I would play in the band, but the novel that came as, it seems, no surprise to anybody, because I was always writing. I was coming up with stories. I would write the lyrics for my friends' bands, and I was always probably more into telling stories than playing the guitar, really.
So much for with us. Now, before we move to talk about the kingdom, because we're here in Aberdeen, I have to ask you about your writing around the Scottish play, the reimagining that you did of Macbeth, published in 2018. What did you enjoy about this opportunity? And in doing that, did it have any effect in changing the way that you write from then?
I think that every novel or even short story or even song that I write, it will probably change my way of writing. I think it's always partly a learning experience to write something, but Macbeth even more so, of course, because there was this very talented writer, William Shakespeare, who had written sort of the synopsis for my novel. So yes, it was definitely a learning experience, but it was also a of Shakespeare's stories, that was the one that was closest to my heart and that I sort of grew up with. You know, that growing up in Norway, we don't get exposed to Shakespeare's plays as much as we do to the plays of Henrik Ibsen, our own playwright. So it was for me. It was going back not only to so much to the play, but to the movie of Roman Polanski that I saw when I was really young, and made me pick up and try to read Shakespeare in English. Being I don't know, I was 13 or 14 years old. I didn't understand one word. So, but finally I found the Norwegian translation, and it was the play that would stay with me. And even before I reimagined Macbeth as a part of many writers being invited to reimagine Shakespeare's plays in connection with this anniversary. I was definitely influenced by the story. Writing my first novel, Macbeth, was there in the background, especially when inventing the main character for the series, Harry Hole. He's partly Macduff and partly Macbeth. You know, it's there's so much material, so much literature, and so much emotion and tragedy in that story. So I think it's impossible to read Macbeth at that young age and not being heavily influenced by it.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. I love what you say, that experiences from a young age, and you obviously like a challenge reading Shakespeare at a young age. I appreciate that, and yet the repercussions, the resonance through the years, and it brings us, I think, nicely to your latest novel, to the Kingdom. The title for me, before I opened the pages, it had a biblical feel to it. You know, the keys to the kingdom, or blessed are the, that idea, being allowed into the kingdom. The title for you, can you share with us what that means for you?
I think the title came quite late. I think we struggled a little bit to find the right title. But when I came up with the Kingdom, it was quite clear to everybody. Yeah, yes, this is the title, that you have this. Even it's a story that takes place in a small town in the mountains in Norway, and there's this family living on top of one of the mountains, having a small farm there, and their property, the father call it their kingdom. So it's they are relatively poor, but it's their property, and that is much of the theme of the story, is about family, is about roots, is about loyalty towards your family, so it was a logic title. Also, of course, that you even a small property, a small farm like that, you can consider a kingdom, something that the two sons, Roy and Calvin, will inherit, and it follows certain also obligation with that. it's a story about two princes taking on the challenge to make something of their kingdom.
Mm, mm. And again, the choice that you made of that setting. Again, I think those of us, from up in the northeast, although I know we're going out around the world, which is just tremendous. But Granite Noir being set in Aberdeen and those remote hill mountain areas, it felt in a little way, it felt a bit like home reading that. But I wonder why you chose, that kind of setting as opposed to a cityscape.
I think that I always like the idea of a closed circuit, or that you have the action happening within a framework, geographically or emotionally, or like within an organization. I mean, even in the Harry Hole stories, it's much about the story about the people in the police department in Oslo, and like I've written about Salvation Army, which was a theme for one of my novels. I like the idea of, there's a very close community, small community, so you can get an overview of that. Even when I write about Oslo is quite a small city. And also I grew up in in Oslo and in Molde, but my grandparents, they lived in small towns like this. So I would spend all my summers, in towns like this. And it is something. It's a special atmosphere. It's of course partly claustrophobic, but there's also comfort and safety in a town where everybody knows you, and they will probably talk behind your back, but also there's you feel also that they feel responsibility for you, and they will take care of you. So it's also in this imagined town of Oz in the kingdom. You have these two sides of growing up in a small place like that.
Thank you very much. Joy, are you happy if we take people's questions, because they're starting to come in as well, and I'm keen that for the people that are watching that we don't miss any of those questions. And so Sue asks, does being translated into English mean we readers miss some of the nuances in your work?
Yes, I mean that's unavoidable. It is some things, certain tone and atmosphere in the language that can't be translated. On the other hand, I must say that to the extent that I read my own work, it seems like my English translators have been doing a tremendous job. So hats off to them. And it's. I remember some years ago, I was coming to the UK, and they said that there's a lot of humor in the Harry Hole series, isn't there? I said, no, there's not. My translators must have put in a few jokes. Well, I mean, there's a certain kind of dark humor in there, but humor is maybe perhaps the most difficult thing to translate. Because it's in the rhythm or the choosing, the careful choosing of the words. You may use just an slightly old-fashioned word that makes people laugh in Norwegian, but that is just simply impossible to translate to English. And also, I mean, the English translation, when you come from Norway, which is such a small language, the English translation is crucial to other translation. I mean, if I'm getting published in Korean, they will have to use the English translation. It's very hard to find a good translator that will translate from Norwegian to Korean.
Thank you, Joe. Now, I have a question from Heather. She says, I listen to all your books on Audible. She said, I love the narrator who does them, but he pronounces you Yo, and he calls your protagonist Harry Hula. Which is the closest?
Well, it's put it like this. My father grew up in New York, and he would call me you, which is the Norwegian pronunciation, but he would also call me Joe. So when I started traveling abroad with my books, I was always happy with people calling me Joe Nesbo. Just made things simpler, and same goes for Harry. It's I call him Harry Hole when I'm abroad, but in Norwegian it's Harry Hole.
Thank you for that. I love how he translates across. I think that's great. There's some other questions, but I'd just like to come back to the kingdom, if I may, and ask you. You told us that it is the tale of these two brothers, Roy and Carl, and as it says on the front of the book, they're bound together by dark secrets. Now, without giving away any of the scrapes that these two men get themselves into, could you give us a little bit more about the dynamic between these two men?
Yeah, well, Roy is the older brother. He is more dark, more an introvert, and he has problems reading and writing. While Carl is the bright, the good-looking brother, and he's more open, and he will help his older brother with his schoolwork, his essays, and while Roy is he's a boxer, so when they have parties where Carl is very popular with the girls, but not so popular with the girls' boyfriends. So when you have this, when they go to dances, the local dances, there will be a lot of drinking and a lot of fighting. And Carl will always be in trouble, but then Roy will come and defend his brother and fight the other guys. So they have they are very tight. They have this loyalty toward each other, but they are very different persons. And the story is told from Roy's perspective 15 years after Carl has moved from the town. He has gone to America to study business administration, and he's coming back to this little town with his young and beautiful wife. And his plan is to build a big luxury spa hotel in this little town that was sort of save this town economically. And Roy is by then running the local gas station. And so he is, for the first time in 15 years, he's meeting his brother again. And so the story starts with this hotel, but also things from the past is slowly rising to the surface. Among them, how their parents died in a car accident in a Cadillac that ended up at the end of this big steep rock, fell 20 meters, and the car is still there. And also the local police officer disappeared at the same time. So what really happened?
What really happened, indeed, and thank you. And I've got a question here from Richard. I think it's a perfect moment to bring this question in. Given what happens throughout the book, do you enjoy killing people in your books? And is it always necessary to kill so many?
Actually, I think that if you follow my writing, I think there are fewer and fewer people getting killed in my novels. So I don't know if that's me getting older or less bloodthirsty, but actually I think that it's part of the genre, of course. People getting killed, so it's it's sort of one of the rules of the game. Somebody will get killed. It's not money getting stolen or somebody getting badly beaten up. In the genre of the who's done it, somebody got killed. So you have to probably kill at least one person. Um, After that, it's a matter of what kind of story it is. Mine is probably half in the genre of the Scandinavian noir, where normally that not that many people get killed, and partly in the tradition of the hard-boiled American detective story from the 50s and 60s, where a lot of people get killed. So the way I write the Harry Hole series, especially, it's within those two traditions, and it's but I see the genre and the tradition of the genre more as a vehicle for the story than a story in itself. But yes, people do get killed. The Kingdom is a slightly different kind of story. So if you like the killing that goes on in the Harry Hole series, you may get slightly disappointed by the body count in the Kingdom. But well, if you haven't read the book, I can't promise you that there will be some killing there too.
Definitely, yeah. And for me, reading the book, having enjoyed the Harry Hole series, and the standalone Headhunters, has been a very important book in my enjoyment of crime writing. But again, for me, what I felt you were doing with the Kingdom is so much deeper than that, and looking at the human condition.
Yeah, well, I think that most writers they use their own background and their own experiences in their writing. Even if you write, I mean, a mainstream entertainment novel, it's you will have to use yourself. And in the Kingdom, I mean, I grew up with two brothers, and I was especially close to my younger brother, who was 1 year younger than me, and we played. I mean, we played soccer together from when we were kids. Later on, we would play in the same band, and he passed away 7 years ago, and I think that it's definitely part of the story. My own closeness to my brother. So I think that I guess the older I get, the more I go to my roots and my experiences, my private experiences and my private emotions and stories.
Thank you. It leads me to ask the question then about, at various points in the novel, you talk about personal experiences. At various points in the novel, you make references to different birds. And so I wondered, are birds, are they something special for you? And Roy, he's likened to a ring ouzel, and all those closest to him are given a specific bird. So again, my first question is: are you a keen bird watcher? Are you fond of birds? How come you brought that into the novel?
I don't know anything about birds. I mean, what I know about birds are in the it's in the book. It's I did have to do quite a lot of research actually for that. I think it was just the idea of Roy, like I said, being the boxer, like being the introvert, like being the tough guy, but he's not that interested in people. He's he's not a recluse, but he's probably more interested in birds than in people. And it was just the idea, the contrast of him being that kind of guy, but really caring about birds. And it was especially this one bird, which is a bird that lives in the mountains. It's called in Norwegian Hailu, which has this really sad song. It's not even a song; it's just one note that the sound of it is so sad, and it's a very lonely bird, and it will follow you if you walk if you go hiking in the mountains. It will follow you, but on from a distance. It will not get close to you, but it will be sort of your friend, but from far away, like it's seeking company, but it doesn't want to get too close. And that is sort of the personality of Roy, I think. So it just suited him, and so I started with that bird, and then I just kept on building, the gallery of characters and giving them bird names.
Thank you. I appreciated that very much. Because I'm a fond bird watcher, and I loved the way that you put the various birds with the characters. Now, I'm just going to go back to a couple of questions from the audience. Someone's asked, have you ever considered writing some Kalymnos noir?
Well, actually, it's strange that you're asking, because I'm publishing a collection of short stories next month, I think. Yeah, probably next month, which is called The Jealousy Man and Other Stories, and it's the main story is from Kalymnos.
So it has begun already. Whoever the person was who asked the question, because they were anonymous, watch out for that series of short stories. It could be the start of that subgenre. A question from Callum. He's asked, do you envisage it being difficult letting go of Harry? And does a bit of yourself as a writer die with him?
Well, I think that I mean, he's the character that's been there all the way, and I had no idea when I wrote the first novel that it would be a character that would stay with me for that long, or that it would be a series. I thought it was a standalone novel, but also I think that much as I would like to write about him for the rest of my life, there's a certain logic, there's a certain gravity to the stories and to the character. That means that Harry will not have eternal life, and there will be an end to that story. I don't say that it's over yet, but there will be an end, and I think that I will feel, well, partly I will miss him, but I will also feel liberated to a certain extent, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that we will miss him, but I know that the stories and the novels that you will go on to write will be equally gripped by. So even if we have to say goodbye, there's more on the way. Question from Alfred: what effect does the country of Norway have on your writing?
Well, that is difficult for me to tell. It's I think I'm inside looking out, and readers are outside looking in. I remember I read a review one of my books in Germany when where they talked about the Scandinavian lights in the novels, and I had no idea what that meant. But I think obviously the culture in which you are raised will definitely have an influence on your writing. But I think also, I think that when I grew up, you would have big cultural differences between, I mean, when I went traveling in Asia or South America, in UK and in Europe. And I still think, of course, you have cultural differences, but on the other hand, to more to 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 some extent, we share more cultural
Mm.
references now than we did when I was young, and um, and so I think that writing from Norway, it's not a problem. Uh, 40 years ago, it could be a problem because they wouldn't get the cultural references. But I think that now there's, you see movies, TV series from all over the world, on Netflix or HBO.
Mhm.
Um, I think that people are curious, they have traveled more, they understand the concept of cultural differences, which was, when I was traveling, uh, in my early 20s, I would come to countries where they didn't, really have a concept of there being any cultural differences, which meant that you could, without wanting to, you could, be rude to people,
Yes. Yeah.
because you didn't know the rules. I think that
Mm.
now in most countries they know that if you go to Japan, there are certain rules there but even in Japan, they know that, what to expect from people from Norway, Europe, or the United States. I think that, um, yeah, you will people will come to my writing as a Norwegian writer with curiosity and an open mind. It feels that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will say though that having just finished The Kingdom, there are moments in it where Roy looks out across the landscape, and at various moments, whether the sun is going down or the sun is coming up, and maybe because I'm from outside Norway, the way that you describe the colours that are there behind that mountainscape, it's exquisite. It's beautiful. Um, but moving on, I'd like to talk to you. There's some more questions, but I'm really keen to get some of the ones that I've got as well. I'll come back to people's questions in just a moment. One of the brothers, Carl, when he comes home, as you say, he brings home a wife with him, Shannon, from Barbados. And at one point in the conversation that she's having with Roy, she explains that she's a redlegs.
Mhm.
And I wonder, could you tell us to what this refers to, and why you decided to use that as part of this character's personality or background?
Mm. I think that, um, I think it had to do with, a discussion. First of all, red legs, as you probably know, refers to, people that, emigrated from Ireland and Scotland, um, a couple of hundred years ago, and they came to Barbados and they formed a community, there. Um, and they were brought there more or less as slaves. I think that this was probably in the 17th century, if I remember correctly, um, and uh, they would stay on there, but they would also form like the lower classes,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't marry too much outside their own, and they would stay poor while you will have another middle class or upper class moving into Barbados, much like, the black slaves. So for me, it was a sort of an opportunity to point out that, if you are enslaved at a certain period of time, getting out of that poverty trap is not any easier for white people than it is for black people. The history will shape the future. So it was, just an example of that. Um, and it was an interesting story. I went to Barbados many years ago when my must have been it's more or less exactly 20 years ago, and I didn't know about this. So for me, it was just a piece of trivia or a piece of history that I had no idea about. So it was just interesting.
Mm. I find it really interesting. Again, it's that idea of you pick up a crime novel, a thriller, and you learn so much more. Your work is it's beautifully detailed. I've heard you speak before, and I love the way you talk about that. You retell a story that the story's already ready, and that in your writing it, you retell it. But all those details, are they already there, or do you gather those as you go?
It's both. I think that there are some like the Barbados story. I had a few. I knew about it, but I didn't know all the details, so I did more research on it. And I love doing research. I mean, I'm a curious guy, so I like to find things out, And but like, but it's also, I have to admit, partly it's what you can get away with. Like you probably know a lot more about birds than I do. What I know is in the book. I do research and I know what I'm looking for. But it's also, the danger of doing too much research or being too enthusiastic about telling people about stuff and trivia is that it is needed for the story, and so it can be a distraction. But I mean, I like, as a reader, I love it myself when I learn something from a book. So if there's something that I think that is interesting to tell people about, I will try to find not an excuse to put it in there, but if it has any relevance to the story, I will put it in there. But I'm hopefully I'm disciplined enough not just to put in stuff there for the sake of showing you things, but it's it can be nice to put in for example, a reference to a band that you think people should know about, a great song, or maybe a Mel Gibson movie from Scotland that you don't think is a very great movie, but that won an Oscar for best movie. Put in stuff like that, and you know, uh, references to pop culture.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to come back to a couple of the questions because they're building up, and I don't want to leave people without being able to hear you on these. So Nola, all the way from Bordeaux, bonsoir, maybe I should say. She asks about your writing routine, and the question she brings to that is, how long does a first draft normally take you?
There is no normally. It may be The Kingdom took it was very long. I think it took me about 3 years. But a novel like Blood and Snow, which is of course a much smaller novel, that took me 4 weeks. My first novel, The Bat, was the first draft was written in 5 weeks. Then I was working like 14 hours a day, but it was so it all depends. It's and it doesn't have to do with the number of pages. It's just some stories are takes longer to write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Martin asks, do we need to read the Harry Hole novels chronologically?
No, not really. It's they are standalone stories, but there is a progression in the series. So there is an added bonus if you read them chronologically.
Mm, mm. Thank you. Just to come back again to the kingdom, you mentioned popular culture, and one particular aspect of popular culture is that of US culture. So, for example, two novels that are particularly mentioned: An American Tragedy and then The Great Gatsby. But there's lots of other references, even down to the hairdryer that's in Greta's hair salon is a 1950s hairdryer. Also, the boy's father, that for him, American culture, boxing, that American influence. Why is that influence there in the novel, and is it typical of Norwegian culture, or is it just something that we find in the novel?
No, I think it's definitely an important part of Norwegian culture, which has to do with people emigrating from Norway. There were several waves. My grandmother emigrated when she was 16 years old in the late 19th century. That would have been, and my like I said, my father grew up in New York, and the letters coming from America would sort of form an image of America being the promised land, of course, and people would then come back to Norway, bringing back the language, the literature, the music, and the cars, of course. Um, and so it would be in certain parts especially on the west coast of Norway, you will see the language being like they say for the trunk of a car, which is they call it trunk, and it is especially words that has to do with American cars are very common. And you have the boys will have American names, like, well, for example, Harry, which is important. Um, and so it's probably more in the rural areas than in the cities. You will have a culture that is very much influenced by American, maybe to some extent redneck culture, but yes, everything from movies to music, and you can also see it in the media even nowadays that they will report in Norwegian newspapers about an American celebrity that we had never heard about, but played in I don't know, American soap opera some years ago, passed away. It will be news in Norway
Mm-hmm.
about the person we haven't heard about. It's just that Norway, we sometimes call ourselves the 52nd American state. So it's, yeah, this is very definitely part of Norwegian culture.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm aware that our time, sadly, is slipping away. Although I've been told that we can go over a little bit because of me not getting technically into the room before. So that's marvelous. Thank you. Thank you for the technical bods that says we can have a little bit more time. Coming back to that popular culture, though, Roy has a go-to musician, J.J. Cale, often in those difficult times in the novel that he's experiencing, he'll have recourse to a track. Is J.J. Cale one of your favourite musicians?
I like J.J. Cale, but he was. I decided I would pick an artist that was right for Roy. That would be, my favorite. I mean, I think JJ Cale is great, but he wouldn't be on my top 5 list.
Okay. Thank you. I'm pleased that that again the idea of it's not everything that would be you. I was hoping though that maybe Whitney Houston's, well, it's Dolly Parton's, but Whitney Houston's version of "I Will Always Love You." I do hope that that's one of your favourite tracks.
Okay.
Yeah, and read the novel to find out why that's in there. I think your timing, because again, it reminds me of Headhunters. I think your timing is just excellent, where humour's brought in, where maybe we shouldn't be laughing so much at things. Now, somebody asked, and I would also very much put this question forward. Would you be willing, and this isn't me, this is someone in the audience, would you be willing, when we can hold our festivals again in person, would you consider coming back to Granite Noir?
I would, yeah. I love Scotland. I mean, I've been there several times, and I really love to come back. I just hope that next time I go there, the weather will be better, so I can go rock climbing.
It would be wonderful to be able to welcome you. A question that's been there, and I'll just frame it. In yesterday's Guardian newspaper, there was an interesting article by Alison Flood on writer's block during lockdown. Now, I know maybe it's been experienced, the pandemic, a little bit differently in Norway, but how has it been for you writing in the pandemic?
It was no problem. It's for me the pandemic been almost business as usual. I mean, I stay at home and I write, or normally actually I write in coffee shops and outside my home. But I'm getting used to writing in my apartment, and it's. We don't get to play with my band, which is sad, and we're looking forward to being able to doing that again. But apart from that, I mean, if you're an introvert writer, sometimes the burden of social obligations can feel a bit hard, and we haven't had that during the epidemic. I mean, also I'd say. I probably shouldn't joke about it because it's a serious situation, and I mean people lose their lives and their jobs. But here in Norway, of course, the pandemic hasn't been as serious and as bad as it has been in many other countries. So I guess to a certain extent, it feels that. The limitations and the rules that we have to follow and the restrictions has been more serious than the pandemic itself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joe, for that. I am afraid that we're going to have to bring our conversation to a close. So many more questions, and I know the viewers probably will. But sadly, they will have to just wait until the next time that we can meet. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and just hearing you speak about those things that are important to you, finding out a little bit more about the insides of a book has been fascinating. Thank you. To everybody watching, thank you so much for being part of Granite Noir tonight. I'm sorry if I didn't get to everybody's questions. There just wasn't time. I'm pleased that Granite Noir book selling partner is Waterstones. Please do visit their website to purchase books by Joe Nesbo, or any other of the authors that have appeared at Granite Noir or will appear. Go to waterstones.com and follow the links follow the links on the festival site. You can attend more of the events. There's more tomorrow. And all the events will remain online, of course. So if you miss any, you can catch up with those later. And one last thing, Granite Noir events are free to view, which is wonderful. But please do consider making a donation to Aberdeen Performing Arts to support the ongoing work of Granite Noir. Click the link on any of the Granite Noir pages or visit the website for more info. Thank you again for everybody for being here tonight. Thank you again to the author, Jo Nesbo, and good night for now. Goodbye.